So welcome everybody to another QIS webinar. Frida is taking us through today. So over to you, Frida. Thank you.
Welcome to QIS Financial Accountability. This is topic 4, planning. Planning has got 3 standards, but before we go to the standards, we are still guided by the aims why we are covering this. First of all, to encourage the right action. Secondly, to deter wrong actions. Thirdly, to identify if and where it has gone wrong. And lastly, to put right the errors or losses detected. So as I have shared, planning has 3 standards. The first one is a budget is prepared detailing costs and anticipated income for all operations. The second standard is budgets are based on real activity plans, which include a full cost of running a project and which include clear calculations and notes. The third standard is a cash flow forecast is prepared on a regular basis, monthly or quarterly. So I want us to also reflect on what a budget is. This is my definition. A budget describes an amount of money that an organization or an individual plans to raise and spends for a set purpose over a given period of time. So it's about a projection of the money you want to raise as an individual or organization and the purpose for which you're going to use the money for. And the period is normally different. It could be a year or a quarter or a specific end of activity. It could be even a day. So for us to understand the important words highlighted, money is a medium of exchange in the form of coins or bank notes. So it's just to understand what it is. Then a plan is typically any diagram or list of steps with details of timing and resources used to achieve an objective to do something. It is commonly understood as a temporal set of intended actions through which one expects to achieve a specific goal. So it is up to us to detail the different steps that we want to follow to achieve a certain goal. The other word is purpose, just the reason for which something is done or created. Time was also highlighted. This refers to the dates that are booked for different stages of activities in the process. Next, budgeting has a process. And before you go through the process, there are questions I want us to ponder about. The first question is, what are the objectives of the project? Here, we are looking at a focus of a project. If it is a project, it will refer to objectives for which you want to actually implement. Then in a bigger picture, every organization has got objectives to achieve. It can be achieved in a year, it can be for a quarter or a month. What activities will be involved in achieving these projects? It's important to detail the different activities which you obviously get from objectives to do. Then the other question to think about is what resources will be needed to perform these activities. Here, when we talk about resources, we are looking at cost centers, things that you need to achieve the activities that is detailed above. Some of these resources can include transport, salary, stationery that you may need for each activity to be implemented. The other question to ask about is, what will these resources cost? This is costing the resources. For example, we have talked about, you seek quotations from suppliers to find out how much different resources may cost. For example, stationery, or the other resources may include salaries, as I've already said. Find out how much different salaries that are attached to different personnel. So it's about seeking or looking out of costs, different costs that are attached to the resources mentioned above. The other question is, where will the funds come from? It's important to think about this. It's about the sources of funding. The sources of funding may be donors, maybe you're expecting money to come from savings. Some of us look up to membership fees, or you have an enterprise and the source of funding is sales. So it's an issue of detailing the different sources of funding. Lastly, you have to look at the whole process, the different things you've written, analyze whether they are realistic. Here we are looking at if at all you've overestimated, or there are some activities that you may need to reduce according to planning. So after putting that aside, you should also look at the good practice in budgeting. So one of the things to look at is the timetable. It's just a schedule of budgeting to consider what kind of participants you need to be on board. Look at the timing. When do you want the first activity to happen? Then the other thing to look at is the tasks. Attaching different tasks to the different participants that you have. So a timetable is important to be put together and shared with the different people you want involved in budgeting. Next is research. As you do budgeting, it's important to read, to have a reference to various points. You can Google for the different aspects that you are not sure of. You can use previous history. You can consult the technical staff to ensure that the information that you are putting in your budget is referenced or has got a source. The third one is participatory. You have to make sure that you don't sit down and do the budget yourself. So this is about involving different parties for particular information or interest. So if at all you need information from the technical staff, please ensure that all those are put on board. The other is clarity and accuracy. Here you have to ensure that the presentation of your budget is clear and is accurate. So the format you are going to use must have been agreed upon and approved to ensure that whoever is reading through is able to understand. The other thing to ensure clarity and accuracy, you can share the different drafts you are developing with other people to ensure that they review and are able to give additions or edit. The other way of ensuring that your information is clear and accurate, we encourage the use of a computer, Excel, to check the different figures. The last one I should talk about on clarity and accuracy is to use budget notes. to explain the different figures that are attached to the different budget lines. Next is use of a budget worksheet to capture details. A worksheet normally gives clear details of the activity, of the budget line, of the units, of the frequency of that particular activity, and it shows a cost of each budget item. So a worksheet is important to justify the different figures that you have put on the different budget lines in your process of budgeting. So this is encouraged. And normally it is also agreed upon. It should be simple for the different people to fill in where they ought to. Lastly, estimating costs and justification for figures. It is also emphasizing on the source of costs. We shouldn't just think about figures to attach on a certain resource or cost center. So this encourages us to have source documents like invoices. If at all you want a cost of the vehicle, for example, go to websites, have a variety of the different vehicles and the different costs. And in your budgets, make sure that that reference is referred to. Then the other thing is also to also share the exchange rates may be used. If at all your budget is in dollars or pounds, ensure that there is a reference of the exchange rates that are used. That is an overview of planning under under topic 4 of planning. So I will welcome members to give questions to this discussion at this point.
Thank you very much, Frida, for that overview. St. Paul's Chibando, you have your hand raised. Please do unmute and ask away.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Frida. You have been very clear. I only want some clarity on the worksheet. The rest of the issues, the rest of the items are very clear, but the worksheet, I didn't, possibly you could give us some examples. Thank you.
No, ma'am, it's raining this side heavily, so I don't know.
Sorry.
I've not had
Okay.
question.
So the question
You have
was,
not heard the question?
yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes. Well, as I first commended her, she was very clear in her explanation. But I didn't get the worksheet clearly. Preferably, if she could give us some examples, it would be more clear.
Hello, is it a question concerning a worksheet?
Yes.
Yes, concerning the worksheet.
Okay. A worksheet, use of a worksheet, as I have said, it is giving you a detail of the activity. For example, if it's a cost center regarding staffing or personnel. So a worksheet will require you to identify that particular personnel you need. For example, if we need an accountant, maybe we need technical staff, an officer, an IT person. So all those are under personnel. So it will help you to also identify the frequency for which you need that particular resource. For example, we need that person monthly. So it will mean that I will need that the units of that resource will be 12, and the frequency will be a month. Then the unit cost, you'll have to itemize each of them. For example, the accountant will be at a different rate from maybe the IT personnel. So it will help you to split such cost centers. Then lastly, even when you're giving notes to each of them, you'll find that maybe you may need the accountant monthly, but it is not a permanent contract, or it's a temporal contract. So a worksheet will help you to analyze the information in detail. So whoever is looking at the worksheet will be able to understand the different totals that you have attached on each cost center.
Okay, I think that's clear. Does it have some similarity with the work plan, or there is some relation?
The work plan will give you an activity in summary. For example, in my work plan, I may say, I will need personnel, and I will give totals instead. But a worksheet, as it is stated, it's giving you the details on how to come up with 1 million, which you have summarized in a work plan. So a worksheet is more or less used in the process of coming up with the different amounts of figures that you summarize in your work plan. Am I clear, or someone can?
Yes, it's clear now. It's quite clear.
Thank you. Becca, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks, Frida. That was really helpful. I think I just wanted to expand on that point there that was asked from St. Paul. Perhaps it depends on the level of detail within your budget, maybe, Frida, that if you're calculating, it might be that your budget contains all those details and you wouldn't need a separate worksheet, but it depends on how you're presenting your budget, maybe. But if you're ending up with a budget that just has figures that don't have the detail needed to know like what those figures are made up of, I think that's where you're coming from in saying that. So if you've got a figure of 1 million shillings, you want to know that that's made up of 5 staff members, for example, or that level of detail is what I've understood, but you might want to correct that.
Thank you, Becca. That is also important, that it also depends on the level of detail. There are those who want the summaries of the figures, and it is brief in summary, but there are also those who need the detail. And at times, what others do, they provide the worksheet, presentation separately from the summary. So it's okay, it's fine, Becca. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a comment from Viva Network Zimbabwe in the chat, which I'm sure, Frida, you could make a useful comment to as well. Thank you. Good practice in budgeting has been too good for me. More often we have under or over expenditure during project implementation, and is most because we would have failed to do budgeting very well. So there's the issue that maybe we haven't budgeted well enough, but you know, budgeting can't be an exact science. So maybe Frida, do you have any advice for managing under and over expenditures?
Is that from David Sigeni?
That's Viva Network Zimbabwe, but David Sigeni's question is it advisable to over budget?
We have under budgeted or over budgeted. Okay. Yes, there is moments when we under budget. That's why I said one of the good practice is actually to do more research of some of the budget lines that we have. And at times we have also not made a provision for inflation, for example. That one also happens. So those are some of the circumstances where you actually under budget. Then for over expenditure during project implementation, yeah, that one may also happen since we have not made provisions for inflation and maybe prices fluctuate or go high. It might not be over expenditure per se, but it's arising from such an aspect. And if at all you are not monitoring your budget as well, you may end up overshooting, over expenditure arising from that if you don't do budget monitoring very well. You may find yourself in that situation.
I guess just to say that with all reasonable donors, if it's a long-term project, you could renegotiate, couldn't you? Normally they give you 10% flexibility up or down, but it is about, you know, planning for best value for money and trying to do things as carefully as you can. Are there any other questions or comments?
The other comment was, is it advisable to over budget while budgeting, or you have to be exact? As I've already said, it is not an issue of over budgeting, because lastly I talked about being realistic. If there is no way you are going to put exorbitant figures on some of the items when people who are going actually to review your budget are also aware of some of these costs. So if at all we take time in our budgeting process to look at research, have a reference, so say invoices or consult, and also be mindful of the inflationary rate, we are able to make realistic budgets that can help us implement the activities we have put on paper.
Sorry, and just to add to that as well, if he's, David was asking if it's advisable to over budget, but I would say in terms of budgeting with donors, it's not advisable to ask for, as you just said, Frida, to inflate the prices of what you're asking for, because that would be sort of deceptive. But if you were wanting to build some kind of contingency in, say if you're not sure how much something, you know, you want a bit of flexibility, but it's always best to be transparent about things. You're not trying to deceive anyone by saying something costs more than it does, for example. So as you said, it should be realistic in terms of costings. But if you are trying to put some you know, contingency in there, you should be open about it.
Thank you. So Viva Network Zimbabwe have put a comment that it's advisable to set aside an amount for contingency instead of over budgeting, which, if that's possible, that's fine. But most donors don't like contingency. And if you then don't spend their money, you get it cut off the next transfer, so, or the next financial year. So you try and protect yourself, and then you end up losing some of that investment when you've sweated for it. I don't know if anybody has any advice. If you can't create contingency, they don't particularly like overheads. They certainly don't like you saving money. What do you do?
Well, normally you can engage, I think, the different funders or donors to talk about the overheads, maybe in terms of percentages. I don't know. There are those who do accept. If at all you say maybe 3% of the budget to be administrative costs, or the other thing is also to engage them. You talked about the flexibility of 10% between the budget lines. So those are some of the ways people have money to get the under budgets supported in one or another. But otherwise, contingency at the moment, regarding to donors, they do not like that budget line called contingency.
Maybe one other thing that might be helpful is that, you know, if you do have underspends and you're monitoring carefully and you can see that you're going to have an underspend and you don't want to give that money back because you can well use it, is you're always thinking about additional smaller activities or resources that you would do if rather than lose the money. So for example, if you're doing a school project, it might be that you hold back on some stationery purchases and then get them, you know, towards the end. Paul, you have your hand up and we've got just 3 minutes left.
Yes, just to say that a budget is usually a proposal of how you're going to spend your money. And sometimes, and I think you'd hardly spend it the way you budgeted. So there's usually going to be an underspend or an overspend somewhere. And you do well communicating probably to the donor to suggest that I have an underspend here, or I anticipate one. Could I please use the money this way because it will contribute to my objective? And they're most likely going to say yes.
Thank you, Paul. Question from St. Paul's. Where should the worksheet appear? Should it be a part of the preamble?
Normally, the worksheet comes at the end. Comes at the end, not at the preamble. It can be in the appendix or in the body, as I have said. Besides the summary of the budget, you can have the worksheet also on a separate sheet or in the appendix. Let us keep it in the appendix, please.
Possibly in the preamble, you might just give the overall ask. So you're explaining, you're giving a summary of what you're asking for, and you might put the total amount in there. Some donors like that. Mm-hmm. Normally they would ask for, you know, your headline figure, but yes, the actual itself goes later. Vincent is asking or saying, while in budgeting, I think it would also be helpful for us to use a memo to back up our expenditure. I think that probably means some sort of concept note, or
well, that's what he means.
Background notes. There are some donors that ask for very detailed notes, even they ask for you to send in the quotation before you've even got the grant. So it can be very tricky.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that budget notes are important. Budget notes are important to support your budget. So it may not be a memo, you can keep it to budget notes.
Okay. We're coming to the end of our time. Paul, your hand is up. Is that left up or you have a comment?
Sorry, left it up.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, it's 3:30 and we like to stick to time so that you feel that you want to come back next week. Thank you very much for teaching us. And we will We will put the recording up on the Crane YouTube site as long as internet survives by the end of the day. Thank you all for participating and all of us for learning.
Thank you. Bye.